Welcome to Wellness Radio with Dr. Jeanette Gallagher as your host. Her show discusses topics of health, wellness, and spirituality and is about discovering your place in this great universe from your cells to the cosmos. Along with her guests in casual conversation, she strives to ask the difficult questions that may be holding you back from a vibrant life and shares new ideas that may inspire you to make a change in your life that you only can see in your dreams. And now, here is Dr. Jeanette Gallagher.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Wellness Radio. This is Dr. Jeanette Gallagher, and it's a pleasure to have you with us here this evening. Tonight we are going to be talking about the web of our human existence, our mind, our thoughts, our habits, our personality, perhaps our abilities, and maybe those things that go bump in the night that tell us we're on a right path or a wrong path. What are we doing in this world? Are we following along a path that was given to us a very long time ago, and we say, I'm just going along because this is what my ancestors did, this is what the generations were about, and this is what I was meant to be doing? Now in the year 2025, there's so much more of an exploration of the mind, the spiritual essence, the more concept of the I am. Who am I? Am I the identity of my profession? Am I the identity of my experiences? Am I the holder of my trauma and all of my past beliefs? And this is the way it is. We are really on an excursion. If we could only hold up the flag and say, I am a seeker, I am an open and exploring soul, and perhaps I'm allowing all of these things to come to me to be able to experience the world in a greater way, to be of service, and to help others. Isn't that really our purpose? But how do we get there? How do we find the path? How do we open Pandora's box? How do we perhaps find the little nuggets that take us along the journey? And what's most importantly is how do we see them for what they are, and how do we honor them? That's what we'll be talking about today. My guest is Nhien Vuong. The book is The Enneagram of the Soul, a 40-day spiritual companion for the 9 types. Nhien, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here. Yeah.
So glad to have you. I think, we talk about how do we get where we're going, and people think about going up the ladder and having an outcome. Truly, the Enneagram of the Soul is opening up to a web of experience, perhaps?
Yes, for sure. It's a beautiful way to put it. Yeah, it's almost like opening to the mystery of experience would be another way of framing it, really getting outside the box of our socialized experience, if you will. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think sometimes when we talk about personalities, we talk about who are you, what are you about, we tend to get stuck in a silo. I'm this, and I'm going to stay there because I'm defined as that. I know for myself, how many times can we open up that stupid DMS-4, and say, this is what you're going to be, this is how you're going to be classified, this is what your mental conditions and your status are all about. And I'm going, close that book, put it away,
Sure.
Because we are so much more if we think about it. Just as you share about in your book, there's 9, as we call characteristics or categories. But when we think about that, we are not one of them. We are truly an essence of all, perhaps?
Yes, I would say our essence includes like all points on the Enneagram, and but we do have a core or default type, if you will. And so learning about the type is like the starting point in there. But I mean, I love how you opened with this idea that so many personality typing systems, well, beyond even personality typing systems, a lot of life is about putting each other into boxes. And as I write about in the book, the Enneagram is not about putting you into yet another box, like a box of personality, but actually an attempt to name the box that you already live in, that you're not conscious you live in, so you can break out of the box. So that's the key. Yeah.
Do you think sometimes once we are able to identify ourselves, maybe in one of these 9, we say, I didn't even recognize that. So when you can fully explore the one in which you are in, you can appreciate and honor it, but then that's when it blossoms out into maybe fingers into others, perhaps?
Yes, for sure. And I love that you're bringing up this notion that from my unity-based perspective, we don't demonize anything. Like, it's not about othering even your ego, even your personality, but it's about just recognizing that there's a limited framework there. And so we are expanding our notion of, like, who or what we are and what is capable, like what is possible, right, for our lives.
Right.
And so it's almost like it's transcend and include. So the gifts and qualities of your point and more and what else, all along the circle of the Enneagram.
Right, because when you have the circle on the beginning of the book, I'll go there, the circle is a symbol of wholeness, unity, and oneness. Even all of the points, the 9 points, are within that circle. So, it truly is about being able to say, we are all in this together. I think so many times people will say, you go over there, you'll do this, you'll do that. And people get very locked into it. Even you can go on another extension and say people go to mediums and psychics and they say, okay, this is what I want to know. It's funny because when they come to me, I don't give them those information. It's like, I don't know. What would you like to dance with? I mean, they want to know the answers. To what? End point. And the end point is to avoid fear, to be able to keep themselves safe and secure, to make sure they're seen, heard, and loved. And when you are trying to say that you want to have all those, attain all of those, and avoid some of them, you're really on a trajectory that's very limited with side barriers, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, there's a practice I mentioned in the book called welcoming prayer practice. And it's designed in part so that you can welcome your life experience. So we don't spend so much of our lives, going to mediums, et cetera, to avoid certain undesirable life experiences. And so this like everything belongs mentality is a core piece of the book and the message that I was wanting to impart, and again, you bring up the circle represented by this circle, not only that represents your individual wholeness, but your belonging, your intrinsic belonging, our belonging to one another, to all of life already, not like, okay, give me the path to belonging, but it's like a path of awakening to the knowing that you already belong.
Yes. Yep, absolutely. You know what I liked about your book is right in the beginning, it shared about, the types, one of the 9 types of the personalities. But the entire book was not about that. The entire book was about how do you nurture, how do you nourish, and go forth. So when you have this book, you're not reading it from front to back, as some may, but you can read in the beginning, but then you just set it to the side and open it up to any page at any time, and you may find something for yourself, or you can follow along for the 40 days. It's your choice. However, I really like books that you're able to just set it down and pick up something and then just say, that was something that I was destined to read for that day, don't you think?
Oh, yes. I love that you described that because that's how I love to read books. It's like dowsing, just like you opening it up to any page. And yes, you get the choice. And in fact, one of my students, community members, called it a choose your own adventure book. So yeah.
Yeah, the ones that you had to be able to turn, and sometimes you would turn them and see. And it's funny because when I have books, there's some books I read from the back, and your book I actually did read from the back, and I don't know why, but I did. And I kind of was going, oh, this is the nourishing and this is the kind part, and then I'm going like, it's not all about just those qualifications. It's about being able to nourish. I think also, too, let's talk for a moment about the different types of personalities, because, for myself, 9 is always been my calling. It is my number. It shows up everywhere. It always has been. And yes, part of myself is in the number 9, mediator, peacemaker, of course. I'm almost 70. I've lived that, for all these generations. However, you find so many more qualities and abilities in all of the others. So how do you actually look at them and decide, or do you need to decide?
Great question. So the Enneagram framework does really encourage and invite people to discern what their core type is, and that it does matter. So even though we have, again, the whole spectrum of our humanity and divinity, and so access to all the points, there's a special gift in discerning your type. And this book was not meant to be that, because so many Enneagram books are already out there helping you to, take the test, find the thing. And frankly, part of the issue is that I don't see it as, it's not a science. It's not like the Myers-Briggs thing where you plug in your answers and it's going to pop out with the correct one. There's some art in it. There's some discernment. And frankly, there's some level of self-awareness we already need to have. As I very humbly admitted in my book, I was like, and I was wrong for years about what my core number was, which is not to say there weren't gifts to be received at point 1, which is what I thought I was, rather than point 3, which is my core. It was almost like a layer. But the core piece of it that people don't realize is that many of the descriptions out there describe behavior. And, two people can fix the crooked picture on your wall for very different reasons. Right? So someone reads, oh, yes, I do perfectionistic things, and therefore I'm this number. I was like, no, not necessarily. And so that Enneagram primer I wrote in the beginning, even though it's short, it really attempted to get at the core piece of what is your struggle, not from a worldly perspective, but what face of the divine, what facet of our unity are you missing? Have you lost connection with? And from that framework, we can, I can go around the circle if you'd like to just briefly touch on how you end up showing up with these certain behavioral and attitudinal tendencies to try to make up for what you thought you lost but didn't really, But, I can briefly just go over, it's obviously much longer teaching, but you mentioned 9. At the core of 9 is actually, so behaviorally 9s and 2s can sometimes act the same. They can both be givers, right? But 9 comes from this framework, having lost sight of the holy idea of holy love, that I am one with all, that I matter is really at core for the 9. And so the 9 merges with what does matter. Whether it's a mission or another person. Yeah. Do you have a comment about that?
Yeah, and it's so interesting because I had just recorded another show with another guest, and we were talking about nature. She was writing about plants and about communicating and sensing with plants. And it's been common to me. I've always been that way. I can tell you everything and anything about plants or how they feel. I would always talk about lily of the valley, the tender white flower with the big canopy of the leaf over that protects it. So I'm very much engaged in that. But then also, too, as I work with end-of-life patients, I'm pretty much engaged in where's your soul going and why are you carrying all this human baggage? It doesn't fit through the door, honey. You've got to leave it, And I think the idea is that, as I share, I always talk about ghosts and angels because I see ghosts. They walk up and down my hallway all the time, and I've always been around spirits in graveyards and things. So I'm very much in touch with everything almost other than the human. Do you know what I mean? In other words, I could see such a big cosmic picture. And I think there's a lot of spiritual people right now who are starting to come into this openness and understanding of that, but they don't know what to do with the information that they're receiving, And I think truly if you're able to pick out one of your types, you say, this is what I'm perceiving today with the knowledge of my consciousness and what it is today, the frequency I'm in. We all think about energy healing. It's the frequency I'm at today. However, just as you shared, you could pretty much be another core one as you expand yourself, because you'll say, you know what, I was very jaded in my reading, my understanding, or my decision of who I was then. I am so much more, and they actually can grow, perhaps?
Yes. And so the idea is we don't actually change our core point, but we can discern our core point after, levels of inner work, because there are levels of persona. if you will, right? And so so there's support and there's help. And related to what you said, I wanted to name the other piece, my book being called The Enneagram of the Soul, that so many people on the spiritual path I encounter, they're like just in their suffering, they're wanting to simply escape from the world, right? That the spirituality becomes a path of escape rather than, for me, it's actually deeper embodiment when we wake up to the oneness, but then the oneness expressing as a light through our particular Enneagram stained glass window, if you will. That particular light shines a certain way with certain giftedness in the world that to me is part of our life purpose. And so within that, there's this, there's, as you described, there's waking up to the collective, waking up to the universal, which is essential, but then bringing the universal, bringing that flavor of oneness into our lived experience uniquely as you, as me, as each of us is part of the journey. So it doesn't end at oneness, but when we don't know the oneness, gosh, do we suffer as individuals, right? As you were talking about earlier, well, why would I seek, psychic help and stuff like that, unless, when I seek it, if I seek it from the place of, which is the best path so I can avoid the path of greater pain, that's one way. But another way might just be that I know that the universe is constantly speaking to me. And sometimes I'm called to seek a psychic or medium to hear this moment and listen to the guidance that the world is offering me as part of the support of this oneness in my life. And that's such a different perspective of trust. That's a deep trust level perspective. So that work of engaging in contemplative practice, and I gave 9 contemplative practices in the book for this reason. I was like, if you just study the Enneagram and you don't have this path of practice for awakening, then the Enneagram is just another thing you learn. It's a map you read, but you don't walk the journey, and that awakening, when we have that, then suddenly, the lens, I think about my 3-ness, 3s are very capable of getting things done in the world. And so, imagine if you hire someone to build your fence, you want them to actually finish, so it's 3's distortion becomes a competitive doing based on separation and a sense of not enoughness. So that's the darker side of 3 when it feels separate from that oneness. But 3 energy, when it's connected to oneness, is in support of what can we create together in the world that will help all of us. Right? And actually find the ways to accomplish that maybe other types aren't as gifted in getting things done, right? But for oneness rather than for competitiveness and separation.
Absolutely, because I think sometimes we do. This is not about attaining something again, another feather in your cap, so to speak. This is a process of experiencing your oneness. That is what we're all talking about today. And in your book, you have practices, and I just opened up the book to Welcoming Prayer, Come As You Are. And what I think is very important about this is that you share the steps, you share some words, you share a thought, you share some engaging moments of time. And it's not very long. It's only, 1, 2, 3 pages. However, it's important to be able to sit with just that for the day and not rush through it. Even at the end, you have a mantra, I release the need for power and control over this feeling. Many times people will say, but this is me and this is how I am, and they're very rigid, and they don't want to let go. Perhaps these prayers and these practices help you. You may not be ready to let go, but you may be able to open the door to listening, hearing, sensing, or feeling something else. Perhaps?
Love that. Yes, exactly. And you touched on something that was very intentional too in my book. Throughout the book, I do mention that I'm short, relatively short, not even 5'2", and only short people measure there, in a half, 5'1.5", So, but the idea that it's a little book with big dreams, you know, and the littleness, though, like being power-packed and little at the same time was really intentional. And that idea that, in fact, if you read too much, you'll get too heady. And so it was designed, those little bits were designed to give you enough information, but not get you deeper into that rabbit hole of intellectualizing rather than living this truth.
Yeah, it's so many times people would say to me, "Where's your book?" And I'll say, "Honey, you just have to find it on the radio." Because, you know, I have a concept, and it's like I just can't sit there and take that concept and write 1,000 pages on the concept. It's like, who are you trying to validate or justify here? Do you know what I'm saying? And yours, by being that, is just you're proposing this, and then this, and then this. It's sort of like the petals of the flower. You're not railroading everybody into this kind of idea that you have to get this way to be able to attain, as we said before. And I think that's a very important, you know, because so many people are saying, well, how do I get it? Even for the page, it says daily journeying prompts. I feel, I think, I need, and I want. Now, let me tell you, you just start writing those things out. And people would say, is this a pro and a con kind of list? Do you know what I'm saying? And pretty much they're not even in touch with what do I feel. They're letting their mind have the judgment. So, I mean, pretty much you talk about this as a 40-day spiritual companion. For 40 days, you could take those 3 prompts. And every day, by the end of 40 days, let's hope you come to something different than you were at number 1, perhaps.
Exactly. And what's interesting is I recently, right after the book was released, I actually offered a weekend training. Now it's a self-study, but it was a live training for people who were interested in leading contemplative Enneagram book journeys using this book. And through that, it was so fascinating. We had a little over 50 people from different countries. And you can imagine the diversity, because I was like, oh, hey, I'm actually not giving you the formula for one. I'm just here to empower you, to equip you with certain background things that I know so you can discern how to lead the contemplative Enneagram book journey that fits you, that fits your community. Because as you were sharing this, I was like, for some, I was actually surprised but delighted. Some were like, I'm not even going to go into the activations yet. Like this first book journey I'm going to do, you know, as they wrote their final paper, and they were like, I'm only going to do the practices. And I'm like, oh, fascinating. Oh, you know, and then the others might be like, oh, what if through that 5-week journey that they do, this book journey, they sit with one of the activations, one of the days, and then you can see how you change in your relationship to just that one invitation, you know? So the beauty of giving space for people to discern what they're called to offer in this almost like holographic approach, right? Almost like this idea that any point in the book you can enter and have an experience of the infinite, right? Like it's not linear. So it's really exciting for me to, and then I'm also in relationship to people like you who, like, as I hear how you're receiving the book, then it like there's relationship here in that for me. You know, it's not just, oh, did you like the book? You know, like, it's not about, is it impressive? It's like, how are you relating to it? What comes up and out for you? What it is elicited? And that's so meaningful to me. So.
Yeah, it's so much more important. You know, I can remember, and you're definitely too young to understand this one, but in 1970, I think 76 or 77, they had these EST trainings, they call them, EST. And I remember the dentist that I used to work for at that time, he said, oh, you need to go to this. And I'm thinking, I don't even know what it is. I don't know what you're talking about, but I had to go or else I was going to be fired. So I went. And what it was a Friday night, all day Saturday, all day Sunday. And what you did is you walked in, and we didn't have cell phones then, but you would leave off your watches. You couldn't bring them in. You couldn't bring your purse with all of your junk in it, your survival things like candy or food or whatever that might be, or anything to read to. In other words, it was removing the human engaging things that we do to busy our time with or to pacify something that's coming up for us. So we went into this room, and everybody was sitting on chairs, and they would say something and talk for about 10, 15 minutes, and then you sat there for 4 hours. Then you were able to go eat for an hour, and then you came back for another 4 hours. And I'm going, okay, this is really weird. But that was the beginning of how humans started to say, how can we connect and remove the human story? It's just that they were very, it was a very,
brutal.
What was the word? It was very, it was really strange. It was a very antiquated kind of way to start out, but that's how they did it, And I can remember because I was so much more in a different space, and they're going, well, you mustn't have gotten much out of the training, and you had to go for 4 weeks of this. And I went for the 4 weeks, and I said, you must have gotten much out of the training. They said, because you didn't get upset. You weren't on the floor wailing and crying. You weren't this, you weren't that. And I'm going, honey, what is your deal? Perhaps maybe I've already done most of my work, or maybe you didn't recognize that. You see? So I think sometimes we say, there are many people that say, oh, well, something's coming up for you. You must have done all the work. When they say that, I just go, oh, okay, whatever. And I think about it, that it's perhaps they understand that there's more work to be done for themselves, and they see it reflecting. And I think that's important, too, to notice. Because sometimes when people say, I'm going to look at this book, and they're sharing it with their friends, or they're talking about it, or they're saying, I'm going to go in and just be able to take myself and meditate for a while and read this book. There's others that will say, what are you doing? What is that about? The human chatter stuff going on. And kind of the idea is that just go do for yourself and let it come up for whatever it is. So like when I went to that, I just let it come up whatever it was. Hey, I just had a baby like 6 months before that. I took it as a rest, and that's what I got out of it. But I think the idea is that can we understand that when you read a prayer or an activation, you may or may not get anything or the same or similar than someone else. It wasn't meant to take you down a road, and if you didn't get here, well, you failed. Because no one can fail when you're opening up your heart and your soul, and I think that's so vitally important. Don't you think?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm sorry about your experience post-est, in terms of that sense of invalidating your direct experience, for the experience that people thought you should be having in order to be evidence that you're, doing the work. And because that's sad. I mean, that's hard, I would say. And I just want to honor that. And I was alive then. I mean, I wasn't old enough to attend probably, but the thing, But as you share, too, it struck me that, two things. One is, yes, there was an era when people were just beginning to go, oh, my gosh, the inner world. Like, we want to take a break from this. And I imagine, as many things do, there was an extreme swing on the pendulum there. And they were like, okay, we're going to go all in this and block you out of the world. And that's one approach. Certainly, does work for some people, and my approach is definitely very different. It's probably why you're interested in my approach.
Yes, you're right.
It's a lot softer.
You're right.
And in that as well, hearing that person's response, yes, I do imagine that throughout our journey, unless we just came into this life completely awakened already, the ego has reaction to oh, you're taking away the things I want. And so I think, when people kind of latch on to that, there is often some sort of purging aspect to the journey that doesn't always happen in a community. That can happen in private. That can happen with your therapist. And so that's the piece for me of can you trust someone's journey just because the evidence doesn't look like your evidence, like what you frame as like what happened for you. And the Enneagram only helps me to do that. That's the other piece, that when I learned the Enneagram, even if we know intellectually that, oh my gosh, people come from foundationally different perspectives. I know that intellectually. It's like most reasonable people know that. But the lived experience of really getting, like we do in our community, people share. And then there are other people who are like, oh my gosh, like we really see how we're seeing through a certain lens. And people approach the same question that I asked so differently. You start to be like, oh my gosh. And when people share honestly and openly and vulnerably, then people really, like, they break out of their one paradigm, and they're like, there really are many ways to approach this that are all valid. Amazing, you know? So there's a question that I used to ask all the time because I needed to know my own wholeness. So I would ask this question, what would you do? Well, I had two questions I often asked. One was, what would you do if you already knew that you were whole? And then the other question was, how would you show up if you knew you are beloved? And for me, belovedness is now that I know I'm a 3, oh my gosh, how things are mirrored to me is very important for 3s. And so that relational quality. But there was a man in my group who identifies as a 5. And 5 deep fear is they're not like competent. They have to keep researching. They're not competent to show up and actually function in the world. Very different from this, like, from my standpoint. So his share related to his dad showing him how to drive a stick shift, like as an act of love, where he felt beloved. And I was like, oh my goodness, helping him be competent, giving him information was an act of love for him, you know, and in a way that, like, I would have never thought that. But for him, it was, I mean, we're talking about, like, what's the big thing that helped you to feel beloved? And then the other thing I'll say is, even my question, it's almost like now I realize other people have a different need for security. I don't tend to need a sense of, like, security, but maybe their question would be something like, how would you show up if you knew that spirit was your ground of being truly? That you were secure in spirit. That's a different question than if you're whole. But the question, if you're whole, is the one I needed. You know, so even understanding that how do we frame our questions can be can resonate differently with different Enneagram types, and they might need a different question to bring forth that tenderness and vulnerability of the thing that they felt like they were missing in life. You know?
Yeah, so it's so different. You know, I was thinking also too, I had written something about I actually did come in open, and I've always stayed open. And I can distinctly remember, I don't know what it was about, but it was over a period of several years. And I would keep coming into different awarenesses, like, oh, my ribs hurt. And then a medium would say, oh, well, that's going to be a bad thing. And I'm going, oh, whatever. And I could totally let it go, you know. And then there was another time I was doing acupuncture on myself, and I'm going, okay, let's hit these points, and I hit one on that would affect that side, and I said, oh, okay, what's that? And I let it go. Then another time I was doing some ancestral lineage work and ancestral line healing, and something else came up, you know, about the families and blah, blah, blah. And I came to the word shame. And when I came, because the acupuncture point is resonating in shame, if you look up the wisdom of it. When you look at the location, it has the word shame. When I look at the back at the ancestral lineages, the word is shame. They've all lived in shame for some reason. But I think it's very important. Once you start doing some of this work, you realize you are not the carrier of that particular aspect as your identity. Shame does not, I don't walk around all day saying I'm in shame, people are shamed, blah, 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 blah. I've never even resonated with the word. I'm aware of it in the lineage. So we know that the aspect is there, but we don't have to identify with it. But we do need to either heal it, experience it, transform it or be able to transition it, because that is our job now in the year 2025, is to be the healers and the energy workers. If you're called to something, a word, it comes up for you. It isn't that you're supposed to, and you say, oh, well, that doesn't quite feel right, and you don't have any triggers within yourself. You say, then my job as the healer of this time, I'm supposed to be doing this work, and this is how I will do the work. And I think that's vitally important, because a lot of times people come up when they start doing this type work, like in your book, oh, well, I feel this, or I get this, or I get that. Okay, just feel it for a minute and don't own it as your identity. It isn't your essence. Your essence is pure and clean. It is part of the fragments in which your soul has ventured. And I think that is so vitally important. Don't you think that once you start opening up this box, that's how that brings you out into the different aspects of the other traits. And you say, okay, well, I'm done with that, and then I'm on to the next, and I'm on to the next. Because you are doing the work. You are doing the healing and energizing work, and you are transforming your lineages, perhaps?
So, oh gosh, I have like 5 things I want to say in response to this. One is, I'm really glad you picked up on the welcoming prayer practice, because you really are speaking to why the welcoming prayer practice is there in my book. This idea that, and it touches on Michael Singer's book, The Untethered Soul, which I loved, and his idea of if you're hit, like meaning if you have a moment and like if shame is there, like the question, is it mine? Doesn't matter. Like I think what you're saying, it doesn't matter. Let it move through. Let it process. Yeah. But to not own it, to say, oh no, well, I'm not shameful because I'm this type, or I'm a good person, or I'm whatever, is to then resist a moment's experience that could actually be transmuted, right? And so that importance of that, and welcoming prayer takes you into the somatic experience of it. So you sink into the feeling, because when we're talking about feelings, sadness, shame, a lot of times we get so much story related to it. We're not in the feeling, we're in our story. And so the first step of welcoming practice, sinking into the feeling as a sensation in your body, which is present moment, allows it to just move through. But of course, the paradox, as I'm sure you know, is if you're trying to do it in order to get over it, you're resisting it, you're not really welcoming it, so that there's a paradox there, that you have to really welcome it in order to let it move through you. And so that's one piece that what you said brought up for me. The other piece is related to the principles that I wrote about, which is something that is so important to me to say in this era of like Western psychology, self-help, that wholeness, as I put in my book, again, this is just my perspective, but that wholeness is not individual. Wholeness is communal. And from that perspective, if we're coming from this like oneness perspective, then yes, that's where, again, this idea that like, well, is it me? Is it my fault? Did you do it? Or like, whose shame is it? Doesn't matter. That we are a collective, and that we do have this individual experience of the collective, right? But if it's right there, then it's mine in a way, right? Who cares if it was my mom's? Who cares if it's, and that invitation to not be so, quote, self-centered in this, again, American Western model of I'm looking at myself and I'm trying to fix this thing. And somehow the more I try to improve myself, the further away, as you talked about earlier, like this journey. And if it's like, if we're not coming from wholeness, if we're trying to strive for wholeness, we actually move away from wholeness, but instead honoring that in this moment as I awaken, I am aware of being this integral part of, as you mentioned, the circle of the Enneagram, the circle of our wholeness. And so, yes, I think each of us just allowing that, inviting it on, not going into that, well, whose fault is it? Or whose pain is it? Doesn't matter. Whose anger is it?
Right, because then that you're living from an outside source. Who did it to me? What did they do to me? Oh, woe is me. Then you're the victim, and you'll never surrender. Do you know what I mean? You're going to be stuck there. Yeah, and I think the idea sometimes is that, oh, well, I can't show my face. But in essence, if you think about it, truly what all these spiritual practices are about in this decade is, am I seen? Am I loved? Can I be cared for? And if we think about it, am I seen? You're just saying to someone, do you see me? Do you see in my eyes and not all of that other stuff? So that's forming the deep connection. Am I loved? That's not, oh, I love you because, no, or I love you, blah, blah, blah. The loved is just a sense of, it's almost like that om moment, so to speak. You just feel the energy. It has no words, no definition. That's unconditional. And believe me, it cannot be taught. You're going to have to figure that one out on your own. I have tried for 7 decades, and they just don't get it. Then the other one is to feel safe. Am I safe? And I think sometimes that's very important because we say we are truly safe if it's inside our soul and we aren't worrying about our human vehicle. So many times patients come to me and they're like, oh, I have cancer, or I'm dying, or I have this, that, or the other. I say, awesome, I'm so glad you're here. And they're like, what? And they get very angry and very uppity because they feel that they're at the end and they need to fix it really quick. When in essence, I'm showing them that they have an eternal life and that this is just a chapter in their book. So I think sometimes the journey that we go on can shape-shift where we are in our life, what kind of things happen to us, or where we might be, or what kind of challenges kind of take us to our knees, don't you think?
Yeah, for sure. And, I love this holding. You reminded me, the wisdom tradition of A Course in Miracles, which I love, says, my safety lies in my defenselessness. And I've always loved this sense of, and by defenselessness, for me, it's like the ego living undefended is one. I think when you were describing this person, or people who come and they have a diagnosis, that I was picturing the wave of the ocean that was about to crash. And this notion that if I'm only identified as a wave, I'm a separate wave, I'm about to die. But if I remember that I'm the ocean, then there's just movement. There's just the journey of life. And I want to add that the piece that my book wanted to do for people was exactly to help bridge that, to not make them wrong for being afraid either. To have the fear be included, to have the resistance be part of the circle of wholeness, to say, yeah, that too belongs, that too is beloved. And somehow the transformation happens not because people are trying not to be fearful, but maybe because they welcome their fear. And in that they can fall into. Yeah.
Don't you think in closing we can also say what we talked about today is not about living from a silo, straight up and down silo, acquisition type idea. It's about living the circle, because no matter where you are, you could be feeling pain and strife and suffering today, and next day you could be something different, and the next moment you're something else, and you breathe into this and you're something else. So you're living within the circle, but the circle does not all of these highways. The circle is just that. It's this openness. So if you can understand that it has a zillion possibilities without having to get there by ... then you say that once you open the door, then the possibilities just start to flow and you start to feel into everything that you're about, don't you think?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. I mean, I think what you're saying is, again, reminding people that it's not linear, and it's not like, oh my gosh, I made progress and then suddenly that, but I love it's circular. And then even more so to the point, again, A Course in Miracles says it's a journey without distance to a home we never left.
Right. Right.
So,
yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that's the best part, that we can end today's show with, because it's truly about saying, where does your heart and your soul breathe from? I mean, your essence, I've shared on this show probably since 2011. I said, I truly see my essence is a ball of glitter, and it's my soul, and it lives inside me. If anyone said, who am I would say, I'm a ball of glitter. That's it. And they think, whatever. But that's the sense that I live from, because that is as pure as it can be. If you're asking me, what are the filters by which I see the world? That's a different story. Than your identities and your tether lines. Your mother, you're a doctor, you're this, or this. Right. Those are all filters that we have focused upon to be able to validate. And that is not who we are. And your book will eventually take you onto the next journey of who are you, really, perhaps?
Exactly. So, thank you so much. Beautiful.
Yeah, it's definitely a place to go. Nhien, can you share with the listeners how to find out more information about your work? That would be great.
Oh, yes. So you can find me at evolvingenneagram.com. So I do one-on-one sessions, and I also lead a community of spiritual seekers, if you will, from every walk of life, from different spiritual traditions and backgrounds, and even, people who are seeking or deconstructing. And so we journey weekly doing some of the practices, like in my book, and learning about how Enneagram wisdom can help point you back home to yourself. So
absolutely. Well, that's absolutely wonderful work. We thank you so much for joining us today and engaging in this conversation, because I think many people are saying, how can I open and explore? And that's what we shared today, yes?
For sure, yes. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. If you'd like to find out more information about Nhien Vuong, again, the book is Enneagram of the Soul, a 40-day spiritual companion for the 9 types. Please do click on the link on the bottom of today's show page to go directly to her website for more information. And it is about being able to say, how can I become open? How can I allow? How can I let go? Perhaps how can I transform? Or maybe how can I just be? Maybe all you need to do is just breathe for this moment. And that's as simply as that. It's not always the doing, the getting, the having. That's all attaining. That's your human mind speaking. Perhaps maybe ask your soul, what would it like to say? And that's truly the next step. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Dr. Jeanette Gallagher. Until tomorrow, have a great day.
Today we discussed many life-changing concepts. Who do you turn to, and how do you know what is best when faced with a health crisis? Dr. Jeanette is a patient advocate. She listens to the patient, the doctors, and the family, clarifies the health issues and concerns, then helps the patient make the best choices going forward. If you would like help implementing change into your life and health, we can talk and see where you are stuck and how to improve the quality of your life. Check the link on the bottom of today's show page or visit drjeanettegallagher.com to schedule a phone appointment today.